What's up, folks? How's it going? What's new? I'm Jayme Bedingfield. This is Too Many Words, a podcast for readers and writers, wanderers and procrastinators. Welcome to the show. You rock for tuning in, for telling your friends, and leaving a review. See what I did there? I have L.E. Sterling on the show, who is the author of the True Born series. We are talking her third installment, True Storm, which follows twin sisters in a post-plague world rife with special abilities, fantastically immersive world. This series is definitely worth the checkout if you aren't already familiar. And I'm going to get to my talk with Erin in just a moment. If you follow me on Facebook and Twitter, you'll probably have noticed I've been a little quiet. That is because I took both of them off my phone and am only giving myself a few minutes on the computer a day on the sites, more on show release days. But this is because I'm making strong efforts to keep my head from exploding between editing one book, drafting another, selling one house, buying another, and being, a halfway decent life partner and parent. I was just really getting overwhelmed with everything and having more panic attacks, just popping up like weeds in the garden. So I took the overstimulating social media feeds that saturate my brain with all sorts of positive and negative and craziness. Yes, so you know what? It's helped tremendously turn things down, and it's nice, and I'm actually more productive. It's not a myth, but I still have Discord on my phone, which I'll continue to keep there, so I'll be updating that occasionally. All Patreon backers have access to Too Many Words. Doesn't matter which tier you've subscribed to. You go to patreon.com/too-many-words and pick your tier, whatever works best for you. And then a link to our Discord channel will be there. So also, speaking of Patreon, I just put it on a little bit ago. There is bonus content of mine and Jerry Gordon's conversation from last week up there now. There are spoilers about his book, Breaking the World. But it's about 9 minutes. It's a great, just fun conversation full of spoilers. So you need to read the book first, and it's totally, anybody can listen to it. You don't have to be a backer. It's open to the public. So go ahead, hop over. If you read the book, give it a listen. Also, I wanted to mention the April issue of Apex Magazine. I realize it's the end of April, already the beginning of May, depending on when you're listening to this. It's been a crazy month. I just finished it, but it's awesome. And again, I love that it's in paper. So if you love awesome dark fantasy, science fiction, and horror stories, and also all their nonfiction pieces are fantastic, you can subscribe on apexbookcompany.com and also go to their Patreon page. You can subscribe from either of those, and I recommend it. Jamie Lackey's The Sharp Edges of Anger I think it's one of my favorite short stories I've ever read, and it's going to stick with me for a while. It's just so amazing. So check that out. And speaking of amazing, we've got L.E. Sterling, who I will be calling Erin, on and talking. So after these notes, I'll be talking to her. Hi, Erin. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Congratulations. You have True Storm coming out on May 1st. And for some of you who are listening, it is already May 1st. So go grab it.
Yes, I'm very excited. This is the last book in a trilogy of books, and I'm so excited to finally see the last chapter arrive on the shelves.
I bet. Is it? Did you find it challenging to close out the trilogy?
In some ways, I found the last book the easiest to write, but also the hardest, because there was so much I needed to pack into it. It never feels finished to the writer, I think. I think it's always just waiting for more.
Definitely. Well, it can be so never ending. I mean, you can just endlessly add and change. It's kind of daunting sometimes, actually.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So interesting because you felt like you had a lot to put in because I know the second book in the series is the hardest because you're building off of what you already built. So I was curious as if the third there was challenges like that.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, this is really the first series of books I've attempted, so I can't really speak to what's a normal experience.
Right.
I had such a clear vision of what would be happening in the second book. It involved a voyage across the ocean, and so I feel in some senses that map was quite clearly drawn. Whereas in the third installment, I had a lot of the mythology in the world to tie up, a lot of the loose ends of politics and machinations, and just some of the stuff happening with the main characters, what was really going on with them, and what everyone was after them for. So it was, in some senses, harder to plot. I spent a lot more time detailing the plot in the third book than I had with the previous two, because the previous two just felt like things were moving on of their own accord. But this one, I really had to sit down and dig.
That makes sense. Yeah, because you're taking all these ends that pieces of string that you've been building through the whole series and tying them together.
And things just get more complicated.
Totally. Well, details, especially during revision process, do you find yourself like, having just like this thought, oh, this doesn't work, or this is what needs to be there?
Yeah, I actually spend a lot of time going back and this is going to sound bizarre, reading the last two books in the series over and over again so that I could get the details correct for book three. Because I had notes, but unless you're actually reading the passages, you're not really sure what it is that people would be picking up. And
Totally.
people tend to binge read these series. So you really want to make sure that after they've put down book two, which they might, all my friends at least would read book two and book one again before reading book three because they'll forget it all. You want to make sure those details are perfectly lucid and that they make sense. And there's always that fear that people are just going to be shaking their heads saying, what?
Taking what's in your head and turning it into something that other people can not only understand but enjoy. I mean, it's a difficult thing. It's a long, long process to get it there.
Isn't it though? Why do we do this?
I don't know. I know. I was rereading. I've been in just a revision nightmare for so long. I'm out of it now, but you're rereading stuff and you're just like, well, in my head it worked, but now it's like, how does this not work?
Yeah. Well, what stage are you at with your manuscript?
Now with that one, it went through major revisions, and now I'm going over lines, so things are a little less crazy.
Oh, I like that stage.
I like it too, when you can actually start. You're like, oh, this is going to be a book. I have to cut it all up into pieces. The stage is not my favorite.
And do you literally cut up the manuscript pieces and scatter them on the floor? Because David Bowie used to do that.
Well, I don't think I like do it as cool as he did it, but I mean, I write it in index cards and map it out,
Oh, cool.
But now I'm imagining myself like tearing it up, like a cat would while holding a guitar. So now, I don't know, as some people, like, some writers who, tackle a story, they have the POV in mind, whether it's first or third. And I know that others really struggle with that decision because it could be told in, they could go either way. Did you lean into the first right away, or did you have a moment where you needed to decide what was the best point of view to tell the story in?
For me, it always struck me that the first person point of view was the absolute perfect and only point of view for the series, because it was so immediate. It grounded the story in this sense of endless immediacy, which I think really mimics the world itself, this very dystopian falling apart, everyone's dying around you, machinations happening. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed that of the character just sitting in her head while she's living out her life. And for me, there was no question. But I noticed that a lot of readers were sort of taken aback by that decision, which I found really interesting. They weren't used to reading a story that over 3 books, nonetheless, that were written from the first person, which I found really fascinating, and I really felt like I had something to learn from that reaction of theirs. The story itself demands a certain point of view, and this is the one that came out for this story. I do happen to enjoy that point of view the best, I think, in my writing, but I don't always write from it. So
I read the whole series. I love that it's told in first person, and I agree, it really does fit with the story and the pace and the themes that are at play. I think in general, I gravitate to first person more than third person.
Yeah, me too. I don't know if it's about the age I'm writing in. It's not as typical as you'd think. Now, I mean, I know that's very different from, say, a second person point of view, which is like the most unusual, but
well, also too, I mean, I do find that, like, especially with, fantasy heavy stories, that writers do often to lean towards the third over the first, because you're able to kind of deal with the whole world rather than just that person's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the case. You can really dive into other people's heads and have that limited third person or omniscient third person. What's interesting about that is it tells a different kind of story. What was so interesting for me is here I am writing about an identical twin who feels so completely bonded to her twin that she experiences her twin's emotions, her sensations, etc. But telling the story from her insular point of view filters her sister out, which I found really important to do as a writer. Because
Interesting.
you couldn't get closer to Margot as a character. You needed to keep some distance from her somehow. Margot being the other twin, for those of you who haven't read the book. It also, in some ways, helped create that sense of someone who is living so subjectively from their point of view, which is what the story is about. Learning a subjective point of view in some ways.
Lucy and Margot's relationship is, it's a huge part of the story. Did you go into it knowing that you had these twins that you wanted to explore, or did you have one of them first?
Great question. I always knew it was going to be twins, and I always knew that they were going to have this sort of special bond. This particular twin story, this facet of the trilogy, arose from a family member of mine, my great-grandmother, who, this is kind of an involved story, but I hope you like stories.
You're in the right place.
Yeah, I'm in the right place. She was this home child in England, and she was a twin, an identical twin, but her father had died in a mining accident, and all her siblings were all starving. So her mother sold her, and she was shipped to North America, where she was given to a family to be a servant, an indentured servant, essentially.
Oh, wow.
But by the time she arrived in North America, she had forgotten her real name, and she gave the family her twin's name, who she was separated from. And she lived up her entire life with her twin's identity and never saw her twin again. But she was reunited with her mother, who'd given her away when she was in her 40s, I think, and she'd had a family and so forth. And that was when she found out that she had the wrong identity.
Wow.
And it was this incredible story, and it just spoke to me so much of the power of that almost mythical bond between these sisters who were separated for over oceans and decades in their entire life, but she loved her sister so much she became her sister.
Wow. That's
so
amazing.
that was sort of the origin behind the twin part. But really, the whole story originated as it was a warm-up exercise for another series of books I intended to write about this world.
Wow. Oh, could you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. So I had plotted out this whole Dominion thing, and I didn't know enough about the world. So I decided I've been trying to find a place for this twin story in my writing for a while, and I'd never really found a good place for it. So I decided that there would be this set of twins, and something would happen to them, and I wanted to explore that. But they were like a side story to a larger narrative involving a salvager, which is, for those not familiar, a salvager in this world is someone who can see genetic variants, but nothing else. They're sort of impaired visually to an extent.
That's so cool.
I don't know if that made sense, but
it definitely did. Well, in general, I'm gonna cut in here real estate. I love all the special abilities that your characters have. I love X-Men so much, and the part of me that loves X-Men totally loves this series.
Oh yeah. And I have to say, I was at first very surprised that people made that comparison. I didn't intend for it at all. But yeah, I guess it does seem very much like that. So I was developing this series of books, and then I thought, okay, I need to learn more about these characters in this world. I need to develop this more. Why don't I just write a novella? So I wrote a 70-page novella about these twins, and I posted it on this story sharing site called Wattpad. Have you heard of Wattpad?
Totally.
Yeah. So it was just a giveaway. I mean, I'd just published another novel, and it was my second novel that I'd published, and I was working on getting something else out the door. And I thought, okay, this is a prime time to sort of explore this. I'll throw it up, see what people think, whether it's a sellable idea. 500,000 reads later, I realized, yeah, people kind of like this story.
Yeah.
People were giving me comments every day, like a slew of comments, hundreds of them, saying, "Oh my God, I love this so much. What happens?" So I took the story to my agent and said, I really think I should work on this as a trilogy. He said, "Yeah, do that." And so the series was born.
That's awesome. So then the world came first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The world came first as sort of this very involved, strange, genetically twisted, environmentally broken planet. And I really do see that sort of theme in my work, this environmentally disastrous world. And I wanted to explore that a lot more.
Interesting. And I absolutely love your world. I was curious what came first, the world or the characters. And I find it interesting too that you ended up, finding a different story than you had planned. This is just such a crazy thing that way, is that you have to get all these words down to find the actual story. It's nuts. I was watching, I'm forgetting the name of the person talking, but I was watching a TED Talk the other day. It was an older one. It was archived on YouTube. And he was talking about how, starting with a scene or a character and then just going in deeper. He compared writing to being an archaeologist. And I thought that was really interesting because I was like, I visualized that. And it's like, yeah, it is a lot like you have to dig around and uncover things as you go.
Oh, yeah. For me, that's like the prime joy of writing in this genre, actually, because the more you dig, the more you find, the more you find, the more you dig. And you start making connections, and you start realizing that there is actually a perfect system involved where things actually make sense and they connect. And it's almost accidental how holistic and full, I guess, or whole the world becomes. It becomes this living thing.
It's so amazing. It's really, it's like, I mean, talk about, the characters inside these, fantasy and science fiction stories where they're going on adventures. The writers get to go on adventures as they create them. And that's just awesome. You actually get to be like, Wendy. You get to go to Neverland.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I don't think it's ever quite happened to me this way, that the writing exercise became the main event. And so now I've actually, funnily enough, gone back to the original story idea, which has had to change based on the fact that I've written a whole trilogy about this world. And I'm trying to figure out whether I can still tell the original story.
Interesting. Do you know if you can yet?
Well, I have over 100 pages, so maybe.
Nice.
And I think it would have to be another trilogy, and I think it's possible. I'm going to keep trying anyway. But it's funny how it's not flowing as quickly or as well as the side story that became the main story. So I have to do more work for the original idea, which I found, again, fascinating, because you would think that with this fully evolved world, that another series set in the world would be easier, but it's not. It's just it's a complicated ball of yarn.
So I read that you have loved fantasy and science fiction most of your life. Are there inspirations, ones that you could really stand out, that, books that have inspired you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, where do I begin? So I have a big brother who was super cool. He was almost 2.5, 3 years older than me. And he knew things that I didn't know. Like he was the guy who was making computers out of spare parts in the 70s. And he liked Conan comics, and he introduced me to ElfQuest and the whole world of the comics and the graphic novels and so forth. ElfQuest, I think I stole his series and read it. And that for me was kind of a revelation when I was very young, because it was the story like so outlandish that I would be reading this comic book series about all these elves and dwarves and so forth. But it was absolutely riveting, because Wendy and Richard Penny are geniuses of narrative and character. So I realized what was possible. And then you get into a comic book series like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this series called Amethyst.
Oh, yes.
Right? So Amethyst, here you have this, it was an example of an early female heroine in a comic book series. And she's definitely not a perfect character, which I really enjoy, but she's very heroic. She's so brave, and she really does sacrifice herself for other people. I was really taken by this comic book too, this world that was created where people are not what they seem. And I mean, it's kind of a funny concept that people are attached to these gem qualities. Again, this whole fantasy narrative where women are strong, women are powerful. And I think that stuck with me throughout my life and really sort of acted upon my consciousness, where I'm constantly reading books where there are female heroines in fantasy worlds, whereas in sort of classic fiction, the female characters aren't really the heroes. Like the classic fiction, like the canon fiction, like Faulkner and Hemingway and so forth.
Oh, totally. Not only are they not the heroes, they're like, disregarded as really much of anything.
Right. Right. They're the ones who fetch the drinks and tell pithy stories, or, they're just sitting in the back of a cart miserably. And so for me, those fantasy narratives were an opportunity to explore female power.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, that's something that is becoming more and more common, and I just love it, are these imperfect, strong female characters that just kick epic butt. I love it.
Right? Like, It's a wonderful time to be alive for that. And I love that that kind of character has taken over popular culture to such a degree. I mean, Jessica Jones.
Yes.
Like, it's so great to have a character like that on TV. They don't have to be perfect. They have to kick butt.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. No, I mean, and the less perfect, the better, because, I feel like a mess. So if I can go ahead and, relate to another character who is also messy, but can also kill all these demons, I'm going to watch it.
Right.
Or read it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think those are my favorite characters for sure.
Oh, definitely. Me too. So as far as describing and managing all these extreme powers, did you find it challenging?
I find it interesting that you call them extreme powers, because I didn't even conceive of them as really powers.
Interesting.
And I don't know if it's me being naive or being too caught up in the story.
Well, abilities, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a lot of just extraness with characters. Like, they have different things to manage than just being, having an anger issue and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they're not alcoholics, but they've got issues. What I found kind of compelling as I was developing the world is that people had one or two things, I wouldn't say wrong with them, just that made them different than other people. And I really found that they were separated from the homogenous class of the upper circle who sort of ran society, and the lower classes who were all just sort of grouped into this lower class called the lasters, right? But then there was this other substrata, this, what would you call it in real life? Kind of like a counterculture, if you would, where everyone had these sort of unique characteristics. But I don't think that the characters themselves necessarily saw them as powers. They were just things that kept them from living fully in those homogenous classes. So, for instance, this salvager that we were talking about in the books, it's Serena, who has lost the ability to see, but she does have the ability to see true born blood, which is the genetic variants that bring out differences in the society. I was fascinated by her because she's so limited in some ways. She needs help to get around the world, especially in a crumbling dystopian world where not having such a basic ability to see the world, it really impedes her success, or would if she didn't have this true-born companion, Carl, who himself is such an utter outcast because he's covered in fur. And that's not his power. He's stronger than most. And I mean, I sort of gave that to the Trueborns because their backstory is that they've been returned to sort of an evolutionary time in mankind's history, humankind history, where animals and human genes mingled, which helps them survive the plague, but it also brings out all these different effects in people with gills, for instance, which the book sort of brings up. But then there are people like Nolan Storm, the leader of the Trueborns, who I found I'm still sort of fascinated by him and feel like I can't fully put my finger on him yet, because here's this guy who has incredible power, but nobody's really sure what that power is other than, like, he's clearly a force. He's got energy. He can do things, but it's such a mysterious power that even I, as the writer, I'm not sure the extent of it. Which is maybe a failing on my part, but
I don't think so. I mean, so he's one of my favorite characters, I'd say, and there is so much to him, but there's also there's this level of, I don't feel like I can fully grab on. There's something that he's keeping from me, and I love that.
Yeah, me too. And I guess that's also part of the story being Lucy's in her first person limited narrative point of view, where she's seeing him from this distance as well, the way one would put someone on a pedestal. But yeah, I really like the fact that I don't understand his charisma and his powers, and I don't really think that his story is done yet. I think he needs a series of his own.
I will put a vote yes on that. Back to what we were talking about with the third person, first person narrative. As a writer, I find it very difficult to have mystique and on characters when I'm in third person, because I feel like I should be able to see it. Whereas if I'm writing from a first person perspective, I can just have the view of the character as the character that I'm looking at them through.
Yeah, I mean, there is always that trick of the limited third person point of view where you dip into some people's heads but not others. But it's so tricky when you're doing a longer series or bunch of works. I feel like that's really helpful for a certain kind of story, but maybe not this kind of story.
Well, I really I felt like I was in it with Lucy.
That's exactly what I wanted you to feel.
Well, I definitely felt that. I'm gonna miss her, because I did. I binge read the last two. I definitely could read more books in that world. I really love the world. I love the idea. Like I'm very attracted by the what possible futures there could be, and this was a really cool way to explore that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to see what more I can make of it.
Well, so I mean, you said that the world came before this particular story, but did you find yourself discovering new things about the world as you wrote the twin story?
Oh, constantly. For instance, you come up with the narrative arc, but then suddenly I was writing in senators and their wives and their way of interacting with one another, and the rules of that society, the sayings, the phrases, the customs, sort of even down to the decor in their houses, came alive to me, and I realized sort of halfway through the process that every time I wrote something, I was making a decision about what that world was. And to give an example, in I think it's the second book, Lucy goes to this man's house, and he's a colonel, the Colonel Deacon's character, and she's in their house and she's looking at the decor, and it's very much a reproduction of a colonial home. It's almost like they've taken a page out of history and tried to remake their home in that image. And I found that said a lot to me about the world they lived in, that they were trying so hard to reproduce the past and these social stratas and these echelons, and then the way those characters from the upper circle interacted, I found so fascinating, and I learned so much from writing about them.
Isn't that so cool? While you're writing, you discover something that makes something else that you've already created either make sense or deeper, or you're like, yes, that's how that thing works. It's just, I love it. It's just so cool.
Isn't it great? For me, that's really the joy of writing these books. I can't say it strongly enough. Like I just feel like it's sort of a magical process on its own.
It really is. I agree with you. Sometimes it can be hard to let yourself lean into it in order to, discover these things. But, I made a note, I make notes to myself. I don't know if you do this, but like I note the project as I go, but I also will make little like, hey, you did this and this worked well for you. And I have a reminder of, don't over plan. Just lean into what you know about the character or the world and find it that way.
That's a great note to make. I mean, yes, absolutely. I think you really do, you can limit the growth of a project by sitting on it too much and by over planning it. And there should be something very organic to the process. At least for me, I need that. I need lots of room. And I think that's why I'm starting to lean towards these longer projects too, so that I can have a very untidy garden and let everything sort of overgrow. It's really necessary for me. I don't think I work well within very strict systems and very strict boundaries. I don't color inside the lines.
Yeah, I'm discovering that about myself as well. And the reason why I had the note is because I got off such a long stretch of like I was not allowing myself to, trust my creativity. I was drawing this box and telling myself to be inside of it, and it wasn't working, and the project wasn't flowing, and it's because I was wanting to be outside the box and not inside the box.
Yeah, you got to let yourself be outside the box.
Which is a good reminder that when your mind, when it's not flowing, there is more work to be done.
Yes, and I'm actually going to write myself a note about that right now. Pardon me for a moment.
It's very easy to be like, okay, this isn't flowing. I can't, what am I doing? I can't do this. I can't do any of this. But no, it's just, I need to just figure out this one thing, or, the direction I'm going isn't quite right. It's an untamed corn maze.
Yeah. I was actually thinking earlier today. I was thinking about sort of the mythic roots of this series, and thinking about how those connections get made that sort of pin the world down and really make them flower. It's kind of another funny story. Trying to write this story, and I was sort of stuck on, well, why the heck Trueborns? What are these people? What are these freaks? Why are all these sort of half animal people walking around? And what does that really mean? And it was a cold and miserable weekend in Toronto, where I live, and as only a cold Canadian day can be. And I took my son to the Royal Ontario Museum here in Toronto. It's this massive, gorgeous place. And they happened to have something near and dear to my heart that day, which was an exhibit on Babylonian and Mesopotamian artifacts.
Oh, wow.
And as part of this exhibit, huge stone tablets covered in these elaborate etchings and drawings. I actually put this one etching or a description of it in, I think, each of the books in the series. And it was this sort of half-human man sitting in a throne with these human servants holding palms up to sort of fan him or shade him. And all these, I guess, leopards lying on the floor and sort of half-human servants, in much the same way that you would stare at an Egyptian hieroglyph of a god, like Bast, who's cat head, woman's body, etc. Suddenly everything clicked for me, and I realized, oh, the ancients believed that their gods were human and animal.
Yeah.
Suddenly I realized that that's what the whole mythology of the Trueborns was about, and that it had in fact existed for millennia. But I guess that's also why I found it so amusing that people have made this X-Men connection to the works, because I guess in one sense, we're all borrowing from an older tradition that goes back like 5,000 years.
I will say, like, as far as the X-Men, your series is definitely, very unique to that. But I think it's what I love. See, I feel like the connection is partially being made because it scratches a similar itch. The fact that people can be more, and that there is this, we have these, genes that aren't totally locked down.
Yeah.
A couple different things. I mean, I'm very open with the fact that I think I could be a pretty good vampire.
Oh, for sure.
But like, just transforming into, animals and being able to move things with your mind is just, it's just so cool. It's so fun.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think scratching an itch is a really wonderful way of putting it. It appeals to such a wide variety of our desires, turning into this unbeatable Wolverine, or like, again, moving things with your minds, or being so super psychic. I mean, who doesn't want to explore that kind of variability to the human existence?
Well, and then what I really like about it is you have these different abilities. Well, what are the not so great things that come with having these abilities? What are the things you can't do because you have these abilities?
That's such a great way of looking at it. And I think that's part of the process of writing any of these characters, is that you also have to look at what they have to give up to be that person. That's part of their story. right? The thing that really compels us as readers, which also like creates the narrative because it gets built into every decision that character makes.
As the writer who's building these worlds and these characters, you have to be careful to not give them too much power. You know, I ran into that when I was drafting a project. I had just this one character just had way too many abilities, and it was really hard to give realistic complications to her to build a plot, because she could just annihilate it all. So like I had to weaken her in other ways.
You have to give her the handicap.
Exactly.
Hobble her or him in some way. Yeah, and I often find that in stories where those characters have super abilities, as a reader, you're looking for the plot holes.
Absolutely.
Potholes and plot holes.
Yes.
When it comes to those characters, because you're thinking, okay, well, why didn't they think of just leveling the building? Yeah, but those characters never think of that. You're right. They should be able to annihilate everyone. So why don't they? So then maybe you need to look inside them for what their moral stance is, what their politics are, what their end game is. How smart are they? How strategic? How many friends have they got? How many freckles? You have to get down into the sort of minute detail of those characters in order to make them realistic.
There's one thing that it was A Plague of Giants by Kevin Hearn, which is a first of a new series. I don't know if you've read it. It's high fantasy, but one thing that I really love about it is his characters, and this isn't a spoiler, it's given to you right off the bat. His characters who use their powers, it ages them. So the more they use it and the more intense that they use it, the older that they get. So like a 25-year-old woman who has just, used so much of her ability looks like she's 75. Yeah.
Wow. I haven't heard of this series, but I might have to check that one out too. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think of something in the True Born trilogy that would be akin to that. And I think it's mostly that Lucy lives in a sort of state of hyper existence that sort of makes her oversensitive and over aware, and she's both never fully complete but never fully on her own, and sort of a slightly tortured young character.
Yes, definitely. Oh, and I just I love her. Was she fun to explore?
God, I love her too. I am really sad that the series is done because I enjoyed being in her head and writing for her so much. I'm always a little worried. I'm a little worried now that I won't enjoy other characters as much as her. Because she's so good. But I'm sure I'll come across someone.
Well, it's like, especially like, we're talking with the power of the first person. You're writing as a first person inside this character that you love. I mean, that's like the fiction writing version of that great pair of jeans that doesn't even feel like jeans anymore because you've worn them so much.
What a great way of putting that. Yeah. And then those perfect pair of jeans get holes in the crotch and you still wear them, but you're embarrassed.
Yes. So I have one where it's a hole in the back pocket, and I always wear it with a really long shirt because it's like it doesn't count if you can't see it.
Yeah. And then there's that day where you actually have to retire them or be embarrassed. So we've come to that point in my life where I'm putting the jeans in the garbage bin, and it's very sad. It's time to go shopping.
It's funny, actually. I'm getting ready to sell my house, so I'm packing all my non-essentials. And in one of those boxes is about 5 pairs of jeans that are so ripped I can't really wear them anymore, but I can't, for some reason, I don't know, I can't let them go either. So like I use them to like wrap my bird statues and stuff. I'm like, there's a reason, I'm not wasting bubble wrap. I'm using jeans, but they're just also they're coming to Arizona with us.
That is brilliant. And the best thing about that is in Arizona, you can get away with wearing ripped jeans a lot better than you can in Seattle. So
I'm hoping. That's my hope. I don't have to also put like thermal leggings underneath them half the year. I reached a certain age that I no longer like stay warm. It's weird.
Oh, I hate that age.
It's crazy. I always remember like being younger and hearing like women older than me talking about how like they have to wear 2 pairs of socks. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm just going to go outside in New Jersey in November with a t-shirt and be fine. Now I have 2 pairs of socks on right now, actually.
Oh my God. Doesn't that make you afraid for the future? I mean, I can see myself being one of those old ladies who has to wear like a survival kit everywhere.
Yes.
Like to the corner store, I'm going to be wearing like thermal blankets and on top of my full length floor to ceiling jacket.
No, totally. I mean, I like, where my office is right now, it's like in the corner of my house where it's like my house is in part of a hill. So it's like touching the hill and there's not a lot of windows. So it gets like, it's like freezing. It's like this freezing little corner. So like certain times of year, if I'm in my office, I have my hat on, I have my scarf. Yeah.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible.
But as you know, I will be landing in Arizona like the hottest time of year. So I'm sure I'm going to instantly miss being constantly damp.
Or you will have a new kind of constantly damp.
Yep. I'm going to turn into a lizard.
Did you ever consider maybe not moving to such an extreme climate? I mean, there's got to be some place in the United States that has like the happy medium.
Well, the happy medium here, though, is this is a place that both my husband and I could agree on.
Oh.
So there is that.
Right.
But, I shake things up. I get super hot and angsty. Maybe I'll bang out a whole bunch of books.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or you can just like turn the air conditioning on.
Yeah. Well, it does. We do have... we will have, from what I understand, everything has like central air. So,
yeah, I don't think people go outside in Arizona, from what I hear.
Yeah,
they live in constantly climatized conditions, which I find fascinating. And I think there's a sci-fi story in that.
I think there might be, and yeah, I think there is like there seems to be like 4 months out of the year where people don't seem too hot on going outside because it's so hot. But we will see. Erin, could you tell everybody where they can find you?
Oh, for sure. Okay, so although I am in Canada, I am widely sold. The books are on Amazon, they're on Kobo, the iBooks, Nook, Barnes & Noble, I'm everywhere. Facebook, you can find me at L.E. Sterling. Twitter, you can find me at L.E_Sterling. And I have my writing name, but people can feel free to call me Erin.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time and coming on. I had so much fun chatting with you.
Me too. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here on the podcast show. Fascinating discussion.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. People can also reach me at my website, by the way. It's L.E.Sterling.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Erin. And that wraps it up for this week. Be sure to continue the conversation on Twitter at me Bedingfield and Too Many Words Pod. And remember to join that Discord channel and unlock other fun exclusives and support the show on patreon.com/too-many-words. Go to the site for more about me, the show, and my words at tmwpod.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. And before you click away, let others know what you think with a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Good luck with your projects. Enjoy whatever book you're reading. If you love what you're reading, please let me know. I'm always looking for book recommendations. Until next time, over and out.